I woke up that morning, like any other day, without any inkling of the storm that was coming. The sun had barely risen, casting a soft glow through the kitchen window as I shuffled downstairs. The smell of coffee was already in the air. Sophia had started the pot before I'd even gotten out of bed. I reached the kitchen and froze. There, sitting neatly on the table, was a small pile of papers, sandwiched between my coffee mug and a half-eaten avocado that I never really liked but always tried to eat for the sake of health. There it was, the document I knew deep down I would see one day, divorce papers. Sophia had placed them there so deliberately, like she was presenting some final piece of evidence, neatly packaged in her passive-aggressive way. She walked in from the laundry room, a dish towel over her shoulder, wiping her hands dry. Her eyes met mine as if nothing was wrong. There was no hint of hesitation in her step, no apology in her eyes. She had made her choice, and now it was time to announce it. "I want a divorce," she said flatly, as if she were canceling a subscription to a service she'd lost interest in. I didn't react immediately. I just took a slow sip of my coffee, the warmth of it a comforting contrast to the cold pit in my stomach that was beginning to form. The silence stretched between us. I could feel her eyes on me, waiting for some sort of outburst, some plea for reconciliation. Instead, I just nodded, my voice calm and unaffected. "That sounds good," I said, pushing the mug aside and reaching for the pen she'd left beside the papers. I slid it across the table to her. Sophia's brow furrowed. She stared at me, the pen hovering in her hand. She was expecting something, anger, confusion, maybe even desperation, but all she got was this steady, indifferent version of me. It threw her off balance. Her hand shook slightly as she held the pen, trying to make sense of my lack of reaction. "You're okay with this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper now. "Yeah," I replied, leaning back in my chair. "I'm okay with it." There was a beat of silence as she stared at me, trying to read the expression on my face. She must have thought I was putting on an act, trying to hide some deeper wound, but there was nothing there. I knew why she was doing this. She didn't need to say it. Over the last couple of years, I'd seen the cracks in our marriage, the small betrayals, the slow erosion of whatever we once had. She couldn't even bring herself to admit it out loud, but I had already collected those moments in my head, the nights she came home late, the empty conversations, the coldness between us. I'd been waiting for this moment, even if I hadn't acknowledged it to myself. Finally, she signed the papers. Her eyes flicked up to mine one last time before she dropped the pen onto the table. No more words needed to be said. The damage was done. I sat there for a moment longer, staring at the paper in front of me. I wasn't angry, wasn't upset. I just felt nothing. It was like a door closing, and all I had to do was step through it. Sophia turned to leave, her back to me now, and I heard her mumble, "I'm sorry." But I didn't say anything back. I didn't need to. She had already made her choice. And I had already made mine. The brunch was in full swing when I walked into the trendy cafe. The kind of place Sophia loved to frequent, minimalist decor, overpriced avocado toast, and a clientele that made you feel like you should apologize for not knowing which cold brew was the best. The air buzzed with casual chatter, and I could already spot Sophia at a corner table, the center of her little universe. Her friends were around her, leaning in to catch every word, laughing too loudly at jokes that weren't funny. Olivia, the emotionally scarred divorcee, was there, loud, dramatic, always just a little too eager to dish out relationship advice. Clara, the gossip queen, hung on every word Sophia said, occasionally throwing in her own 2 cents. And then there was Hannah. Hannah was different, quiet, observant. The kind of person who didn't need to speak often to know exactly what was going on in the room. She always had a way of cutting through the noise. I couldn't help but notice the way Sophia had her shoulders back, sitting like she was the queen of the group, each friend there to validate her, each word that came out of her mouth a carefully rehearsed performance. She noticed me before I could sit down, her lips curling into a fake smile, as if she had expected me to be the one who showed up late. "James," she exclaimed, almost too cheerfully. "You made it." I was just telling them about our situation. I raised an eyebrow as I sat down. "Situation?" "You know, the divorce." She practically beamed, though the energy felt off, like she was trying too hard to keep her composure. Her friend's eyes flicked between us, waiting for the fireworks. Olivia was the first to chime in, of course. "Oh my God, he didn't even fight you for it? No begging? No pleading?" Her voice cracked with exaggerated disbelief, her eyes wide as if I had just performed some grand, unimaginable act of indifference. I gave her a polite smile. "Nah, it's all good. Clara, ever the one to amplify drama, leaned forward, her voice thick with judgment. I mean, how could he just walk away like that? Wasn't there any passion? Any emotion? She gave a small, mocking laugh. I bet he's a sociopath. Sophia's eyes flickered to me, expecting me to react. I didn't. I didn't give her the satisfaction. Instead, I just looked at her, waiting for her to continue her performance. The table fell into an awkward silence, and I could feel the tension building in the air. It was like they were all waiting for me to lose my cool, for me to lash out, to beg for another chance. But I didn't. I was done. I just don't get it, Olivia said, shaking her head, her voice full of faux pity. You were together for how long? And he just, what? Gave up. She looked at Sophia with wide, watery eyes. How could he do that to you, Sophia? Sophia lowered her gaze, her eyes glistening as she faked a sniffle. I don't know, Liv. I really don't know. She wiped away an imaginary tear, her voice cracking just enough to sell the act. I tried. I really did. But it was like he didn't even care. The other women nodded, their expressions sympathetic, even if they hadn't been privy to any of the real details. Hannah, however, didn't buy it. She hadn't said a word since I walked in, but I could feel her eyes on me, sharp and calculating. She was the only one who seemed to be watching more than listening. Sophia continued her tale, talking about how I had been distant, how I had checked out of the marriage, how I never fought for her. I couldn't believe it. She was twisting everything, turning herself into the innocent party. It was almost laughable, and I found myself tuning her out. And then, just as I was about to take a sip of my water, I caught Hannah's gaze. She wasn't looking at Sophia. She was looking at me, her expression unreadable, but I could sense that she was taking everything in, absorbing the words, the way Sophia performed, the way I stayed calm and silent. Finally, after a long beat, Hannah spoke, her voice quiet but pointed. Maybe he didn't leave you because of her, she said, her eyes fixed on Sophia. Maybe he left because of you. The table went still. Sophia's smile faltered for just a moment, her eyes widening as if she had been slapped. The others around the table blinked, confused. They were used to the rehearsed drama, the story they were all meant to believe. But Hannah had just broken the script. Sophia opened her mouth to protest, but no words came out. She glanced at Olivia, at Clara, as if searching for backup, but none of them dared speak. The shift in the room was palpable. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. Hannah had said it all. The truth, however unspoken, was hanging in the air. Sophia sat back, her face flushed with a mixture of disbelief and frustration. She quickly regained her composure, though, the mask of the victim slipping back into place. Well, she said with a forced laugh, I'm glad you're all so concerned, but I'm doing fine. Really? Everything's moving forward. She turned to me with a tight smile. It's better this way, don't you think? I looked at her for a long moment before responding. Yeah, I think so. And in that moment, I realized something. Sophia wasn't just playing a victim for her friends. She was playing the role of the martyr for herself, too. She needed them to see her as the one who was hurt, who was wronged, who had been abandoned. But Hannah had seen through the act. And for once, I didn't feel invisible. I felt something I hadn't in a long time free. The conversation shifted after that. But it didn't matter. I was already gone, mentally checked out of the whole charade. Sophia could have her pity party. I didn't need to be part of it anymore. The days after the brunch passed in a haze. I went through the motions, the routine of work, the quiet evenings at home, and the silence that had begun to settle between Sophia and me. It was as if the house had become a hollow shell, a place I no longer recognized, where the only sound was the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional rustle of Sophia's movements upstairs. I wasn't sure when it started, but something had changed inside me. I could feel it deep in my bones. The numbness had begun to spread, not in an overwhelming way, but like a slow, creeping fog that dulled everything in its path. Sophia's presence, once a constant in my life, had become nothing more than a background noise. The divorce papers had been signed, but there was no fight, no dramatic confrontation. It was just done. And with it, something else inside me began to dissolve. I started taking small steps in my withdrawal. I packed up a few things that meant something to me. The leather notebook we bought on our first anniversary, a gift she'd given me that had sat in the corner of our bedroom for years, a small keepsake from a trip we'd taken to the mountains, tucked away in a drawer I no longer opened. I didn't want to leave the house entirely, not yet, but I didn't need these things anymore. They were just reminders of a life I'd already left behind. The first few days, I didn't notice much. I was still there, technically, still sleeping in our bed, still eating the meals we used to share, but it wasn't the same. The space between us had grown, invisible but palpable, and every glance we exchanged felt like a rehearsal for the inevitable. Then one day, after coming home from work, I realized I had begun to take more and more of my things. A suitcase, a few boxes. I stopped by the closet, and without even thinking, I pulled out the jacket I used to wear on business trips, the one that smelled faintly of cologne I no longer used. I folded it neatly and set it aside. A few shirts, a pair of shoes. I didn't tell her what I was doing. I didn't need to explain. It didn't feel like I was running away. It felt more like I was simply leaving. The absence of confrontation, of any kind of acknowledgement from her, was like a weight that was slowly lifting from my chest. The silence was doing its work, making the distance between us undeniable. Sophia noticed, of course. She wasn't blind. She'd see the empty spaces in the closet, the absence of the small trinkets I used to leave around. I saw it in her eyes, the confusion and frustration, but she didn't ask. Not a single word. I made it easy for her not to. I didn't need her to question me, to beg me to stay, to pretend like things hadn't already ended. She had her way of making everything feel like a performance, but I was done playing my part. A few days later, after the majority of my things were gone, Sophia came down the stairs, her footsteps heavy. She stood in the doorway of the living room, looking at the boxes stacked by the door, the empty spaces where my things used to be. "Are you leaving?" she asked, her voice strangely flat. No anger, no tears, just a question that felt like an afterthought. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to look at her to know she was there. "I've already left," I said quietly, my eyes still focused on the floor in front of me. I heard her take a small breath, like she was trying to process what I'd said. Then the silence stretched again, longer this time, until she finally spoke. "James," she stopped herself, and I could hear the hesitation in her voice. It wasn't what she wanted to say, I could tell. There was something she was trying to hold back, but it wasn't enough. She couldn't find the right words, or maybe she just didn't want to say them. I glanced up briefly, meeting her gaze for just a moment. "I don't think there's anything left to say," I said, my voice calm, detached. "I think we're done here." There was a slight twitch in her jaw, but she didn't respond. She just turned and walked back upstairs, and I was left standing there, the weight of her absence heavier than the space she'd left behind. It was over, and for the first time in months, I felt something like peace. The apartment was quiet. Too quiet. It had only been a few days since I'd moved into the Riverton, a sleek, modern high-rise across the river, one of those buildings with glass walls that offered a view of the skyline and made you feel like you were living in some high-budget movie. It wasn't what I had imagined for myself. This wasn't the kind of life I'd pictured when I'd been with Sophia. But in a strange way, it felt like the perfect place. A blank slate. The kind of place that didn't ask any questions and didn't care who I was or where I came from. I'd packed the essentials. A bed, a desk, a chair. The bare minimum. I hadn't bought a single piece of decoration. There were no framed pictures of the places I'd been, no keepsakes from my years with Sophia. Nothing to remind me of the life I was leaving behind. I didn't need any of that here. I was erasing myself from the world we'd built together, and with it, everything that tied me to the life I had walked away from. For the first time in a long time, I felt completely untethered, and it was freeing. But as much as the apartment was mine now, I realized it wasn't just about the physical space. It was the life I was building in it, or rather, the life I was unbuilding from. The phone calls I didn't return, the messages I ignored, the social media accounts I deleted or changed to a name that barely resembled the person I used to be. I didn't need anyone to know where I was. I didn't need anyone to know I existed. The first time Sophia tried to contact me, I saw the missed call on my phone, the message that read, "Are you okay? Can we talk?" The typical Sophia message, casual, like we were still just having a normal conversation, like nothing had changed. But I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The second time, it was a text. "James, please. Don't do this. I can't fix this if you keep disappearing." I just stared at the screen, emotionless. By the time I had moved into the apartment and settled in, I had cut off every connection. My office, my old colleagues, nothing but a distant memory. I didn't want them reaching out either. I changed my email, my phone number, even my social media profiles, making sure to obscure any trace of the person I used to be. To everyone else, I was now a ghost. And it was working. No one came looking for me. At first, I was surprised by how easy it was to disappear. The world kept turning. Work got done. People went about their lives as if I didn't exist. I didn't reach out to anyone. I didn't check in on the people I used to call friends. I didn't even leave the building unless I had to. I thought it would be harder. I thought I would feel more regret, more guilt. But there was nothing at all. It was as if the absence of Sophia, the absence of everything we had, wasn't just a loss. It was a relief. But then, a few days later, I started to notice the cracks in my silence. Sophia called again. This time, she reached out to my work. She'd gone through the old channels, asking my colleagues if they'd heard from me, trying to get a hold of me through people I hadn't spoken to in years. No one had answers for her. I heard from my old office a few days after that. They had received a call from her, too. She'd asked if I was still working with them. She wanted to know if I'd been sick, if something was wrong. The fact that no one had any answers seemed to unsettle her even more. The days passed, and as I spent more time in my apartment, the walls of isolation started to close in. I didn't leave, didn't even step outside unless it was for food or essentials. I had everything I needed in here. Everything except for what I once had. A connection to someone, anyone. And I started to realize something. Sophia's attempts to reach out were more than just her trying to get answers. She wasn't worried about me. She was worried about herself, about how my disappearance, my complete lack of response, was affecting her. I could feel it now, the ripple of my absence. The silence became my loudest weapon, and it unsettled her more than I ever could have. And then, one day, I received another text from her. "James, I don't know what I did wrong. Please, just tell me what's going on. I'm trying to fix this." I read the message, but I didn't reply. I didn't need to. There was nothing left to fix. The silence was enough, and it was more powerful than any conversation I could have had. That's when I understood. I wasn't just disappearing from her life. I was disappearing from my own. And for the first time, I didn't feel lost. I felt free. It had been a few weeks since I'd moved out, and the apartment had settled into a rhythm that felt almost normal. The quiet, the solitude, it all made sense in a way that my old life never had. But it was inevitable, I suppose. Sophia and her friends had made it through the initial shock of my disappearance. But eventually, the truth would come out. It was a Saturday afternoon when it happened. I was sitting on the couch, sipping a glass of water, scrolling through old work emails when I got the call. It was from my mom, the first time she had reached out since I left. The words in her voice were familiar, hesitant. She was always careful with me, like she wasn't sure if she had permission to care. "James, sweetheart, are you all right?" she asked gently, as if she hadn't heard the rumors or figured out why I'd vanished from everything. I swallowed a sigh. "Yeah, I'm good, Mom. Everything's fine." There was a pause on the other end of the line, the way she was probably looking for the right words, trying to piece things together. I just don't want you to be alone. We're worried. Your father, he hasn't been himself, either." I rubbed my eyes and leaned back into the couch. "I'm fine, Mom. Really." But she wasn't satisfied with that. Not by a long shot. I knew her too well. "James," she started again, her voice more serious now. "Sophia's she's been asking about you. A lot. She doesn't understand what's happened. She says you won't talk to her. She's been devastated." I didn't feel a thing. Not a twinge of guilt. Not even an ounce of anger. Just a weightlessness. A feeling that I had finally let go of whatever burden she had placed on me all these years. "I'm not the one who's devastated, Mom," I said, my voice softer now. "She's the one who decided this was the way it had to end." "James," her voice cracked with that familiar edge of worry. "You need to understand. She's trying. She wants to fix things. And maybe it's time you both talk. At least for the sake of everything you shared." I heard the pleading in her tone, the subtle way she pushed me toward reconciliation, as if that was the only path left. But I didn't respond the way she wanted me to. I didn't promise to talk, to meet, to do anything. Instead, I let the silence settle between us, thick and heavy. "Maybe," I finally said, cutting through the quiet, "maybe it's time I move on." She didn't know how to respond to that. But before we could get further into the conversation, a familiar name popped up on my phone. Sophia. I felt a brief flicker of annoyance, but I ignored it, letting it go to voicemail. My mom stayed quiet on the other end, waiting for me to pick up where I left off, but I changed the subject quickly. "Listen, I gotta go. I'll talk to you later, all right?" I hung up before she could say anything else, silencing the buzz of expectation. But just as I put the phone down, another notification popped up, this time a message from Sophia. James, I can't keep doing this. We need to talk. This is tearing me apart. I don't know what you're trying to prove, but I need to know where we stand. Please, I'm begging you. Meet me at the cafe tomorrow. Just one last conversation. She had no idea how much the message did for me. She had staged this whole thing, acting as if she were the wounded party. She had become the victim of her own choices, the one left behind. But I could see it clearly now, and it felt good, like watching someone trying so hard to put on a mask that you could see right through it. The message lingered for a few minutes before I finally typed a simple response. I'm done. I hit send, leaned back, and took a deep breath. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel any conflict, any confusion. The air felt clear. But even though I was resolved, the next morning, I couldn't resist. I had to see it for myself, the performance she had staged with her friends. I walked into the cafe around noon. It wasn't crowded, but the people there were exactly the kind Sophia surrounded herself with, well-groomed, polite, a little too perfect. They looked up at me when I walked in, their faces betraying nothing but curiosity, like they'd all been waiting for this moment to unfold. Sophia was sitting at a table by the window, her back straight and her face composed, as if she were in the middle of a show. She smiled when she saw me, but it didn't reach her eyes. You came, she said, her voice a little too chipper. I sat down without responding at first, just watching her carefully. She had this air about her, like she was the one who had everything under control, like this conversation was all part of her plan. I didn't want it to end like this. James, she said, pushing her coffee cup aside, her eyes softening just a bit, almost as if she were about to start crying. I've tried everything. I've really tried. I just want us to find a way to make it work. I could see the cracks now, the effort she was putting into this, the rehearsed lines. It was all falling apart in front of her, but she didn't know it yet. I leaned forward, meeting her gaze. It's too late for that. You wanted this. You pushed me away, and now you're pretending like you don't understand why I'm gone. Her lips parted, her breath catching. But she didn't argue. Instead, she lowered her eyes, looking away for a moment. I don't think you understand, she said, her voice quieter now, the confidence slipping. I'm sorry, James. I really am. I didn't want this. I don't know how it all went wrong. I watched her for a moment, letting the silence hang in the air before I responded. You don't get to apologize for what you've already done, Sophia. This is over. She looked at me, searching for any hint of a response. But there was nothing. She was right about one thing. This was tearing her apart. But it was already done. The only thing left was for her to realize it. Sophia opened her mouth as if she were about to say something, but instead, she closed it. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel anything for her. I think you should go, I said, standing up. Sophia didn't move, just sat there staring at me as I walked away. I left the cafe without looking back. And this time, when I stepped out into the fresh air, I didn't feel the weight of her presence pulling me back. I felt nothing but the relief of letting go. It was a few days later when it happened, when I realized the truth. I hadn't expected it to hit me so suddenly, but it did. Like a sharp slap in the face that I couldn't ignore, no matter how hard I tried to convince myself otherwise. I had been walking through the grocery store, my mind drifting from the usual nonsense, work, what I'd make for dinner, whether I should try the new craft beer on sale. Just another mundane task I'd left the apartment to take care of, another thing to fill the silence. But as I rounded a corner in the aisle, I saw it. A photo, propped up on a display board by the checkout counter, and everything around me seemed to freeze. It was a picture of Sophia, and next to her was someone I didn't recognize. At first, I couldn't make sense of it. I thought maybe it was just another one of those staged, overly posed photos, one of those look at me and my new partner kinds of things that you see on social media. But there was something about it that didn't sit right. Sophia was smiling, genuinely smiling, and her eyes were bright, free, like she hadn't looked in a long time. And standing beside her, his arm casually around her shoulder, was a man. He had short, dark hair, a clean-cut look, and a smile that looked too at ease, like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. I stared at the picture for a long time. The grocery store around me continued in its usual hum, the beeping of the self-checkout machines, the faint music in the background. But for me, everything else was on mute. All I could hear was the buzzing in my head. My first thought was one of disbelief. No, this didn't make sense. She had told me she was struggling with the divorce. She'd sent messages, called, texted, trying to manipulate me back into her world, into some version of us that had died a long time ago. How could she be so easily moving on? I tried to shake off the tightness in my chest. So what if she was with someone else? It didn't matter. She had made her choice. I'd made mine. But even as I told myself this, I felt something dark and uncomfortable gnawing at the back of my mind. As I reached for a bottle of water from the shelf, my hand shook slightly. I wasn't supposed to care about this. I wasn't supposed to be the one feeling anything right now. She had moved on, so why shouldn't I? It was over. That was the whole point of everything I had done. But then, as I stood there, staring at the photo of her with someone else, I felt the sharp sting of jealousy. It wasn't that I wanted her back. No, that wasn't it at all. But it was the realization that she had completely detached from me, that all the time we had spent together, the moments I thought mattered, had meant nothing in the end. I quickly grabbed the water, paid for it without really looking at the cashier, and left the store. I didn't want to stay in the building, didn't want to be there for another second. I needed space. I needed to be alone with my thoughts, to process whatever it was that had just hit me. Back at the apartment, I sank into the couch, water bottle in hand, my mind spinning. How long had this been going on? Had she been seeing him before we even separated? Or was this the result of her trying to rebuild herself, her life, after our marriage ended? My phone buzzed, snapping me out of my thoughts. It was a text from Hannah, the only one who had ever seemed to see through Sophia's performance, the only one who hadn't bought into the idea that I was the bad guy. The message was simple, direct. I saw the photo. Is everything okay? I didn't want to respond, didn't want to talk to anyone about it. But then I realized something. Hannah had seen it too. It wasn't just me. Everyone knew now. Sophia had moved on, and I was no longer a part of the picture. I stared at the message for a long time before finally typing a response. I don't know. I thought I was okay, but seeing her with him, I don't know. It hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't a long message, but it was enough. Enough for Hannah to know that I wasn't fine, that I was lying to myself, just like I had been since the moment I left. Seconds later, Hannah's reply popped up. You're allowed to feel how you feel, James. You're human. Don't forget that. It wasn't the kind of answer I had been expecting, but it was the kind I needed. It was the kind of truth I had been avoiding, the one I had buried under the silence of the last few weeks. I was human, and I had every right to feel this way. But there was still something else I couldn't shake. The man in the photo. The way Sophia's smile had looked, so genuine, so effortless. That was what stung the most. I thought I had already said goodbye to her. But what I hadn't expected was the sudden, sharp reality of it all. She was gone, and I was left to pick up the pieces. But this time, I wasn't just picking up the broken shards of a relationship. This time, I was picking up the pieces of myself. I had moved on in some ways, but not in the way I had hoped, not in the way I needed. And that realization hit harder than anything else. The knock on the door came at precisely 7:13 p.m. I remember because I had just gotten comfortable on the couch, flipping through an old novel I'd found buried in one of the boxes I hadn't unpacked yet. I'd been trying to distract myself, to forget about everything. The sight of Sophia with that man, the cold sting of realization that my life had moved on without me. I didn't even look at the clock when I heard the knock, just the dull sound of knuckles against wood. It was so familiar, yet somehow out of place. I wasn't expecting anyone. No one had really reached out since I'd moved into the apartment. Not even my mom had called in the past couple of days. It was like the world had given me permission to slip through the cracks and disappear, and I had taken full advantage of that. But then that knock. I stood up slowly, an unease settling in the pit of my stomach. I didn't want to answer it. I knew who it was before I even reached the door. When I opened it, the sight of her standing there, drenched in rain, her makeup running slightly down her face, was almost surreal. She didn't belong here, not in my new life, not in this space I had carefully carved out for myself. Sophia's eyes flicked up to mine, her expression unreadable. She didn't smile, didn't offer any greeting. Instead, she just stood there, dripping water onto the floor, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. James, she said quietly, her voice barely audible above the sound of the rain still falling outside. She paused, her words catching in her throat as if she didn't quite know where to begin. I wasn't sure I cared where she began. I wasn't interested in any more explanations or apologies. I wasn't interested in hearing about how she'd felt misunderstood or how hard this had been for her. I didn't need to hear any more of her rehearsed lines. But I stepped aside and let her in anyway. Not because I wanted her there, but because part of me still couldn't let go of the ghost of what we once were. Maybe this was the last thread of that person still holding on. Sophia stepped in and immediately pulled the towel I handed her over her shoulders, drying off her hair. She looked exhausted, her face pale, the kind of exhaustion I recognized as something more than just physical, something deeper. She must have been fighting it for weeks, hiding behind that mask of control she'd always put on. When she finished drying off, she turned toward me. I didn't know where else to go. Her voice was small, fragile. I thought, maybe we could talk. I didn't respond immediately. I just stared at her, unsure of how I should feel. My mind was still whirling from the earlier realization, from seeing that photo. Seeing her move on so easily had cut deeper than I wanted to admit. Why? I finally asked, my voice rough with the weight of everything unsaid. Why now, Sophia? She didn't look at me when she answered. Her eyes darted around the room, like she was searching for something she couldn't find. I didn't know what to do. I've been trying to reach you for weeks, but you've... She stopped herself, swallowing hard before continuing. I guess I thought if I came here, you'd finally talk to me. I let the silence hang between us. Her words were full of desperation, but there was something hollow in them, too. I had known this moment was coming. She had to come here, to confront me in some way, because she couldn't let me disappear without a fight. But it wasn't the fight I was expecting. She shifted uncomfortably from foot to foot, her gaze flicking back to me. James, she started again, her tone quieter, almost pleading. I don't know what I did. I don't know when it all fell apart. But I never wanted to lose you. I was numb, not angry, not sad, just numb. This wasn't about what she wanted anymore. She had already made her choices, long before I ever left. I think you already lost me the moment you walked away from everything we had, I said, my voice colder than I intended. It was a harsh thing to say, but it felt true. She had checked out long before I had. Her lips parted, but no words came out. She stared at me for a long moment, the silence between us stretching on until it became unbearable. She looked as though she was about to say something, but then she closed her mouth, her shoulders slumping with resignation. The quiet that followed felt like an anchor in the room, pressing down on both of us, making every word, every glance feel heavier than it needed to be. And then, as if on cue, I noticed her, the woman sitting in the living room, staring at us from the corner, a faint smile on her lips. My mind processed it slowly, like a fog clearing. She was sitting there, elegantly, as though she belonged. And the realization hit me hard. Monica Prescott. The name floated back to me, carried by a bitter wave of recognition. I had known her from college, or more accurately, I had known of her. The one person Sophia had always mocked behind her back, the one person she'd made me feel guilty about even considering. The one woman from Sophia's past who had always been a threat, a shadow she couldn't control. And now here she was, sitting in my living room, like she was just another part of the picture. She had replaced me before I had even left. I turned to Sophia, and the weight of everything fell on me. You've already moved on, haven't you? The words slipped out before I could stop them. Sophia's face flushed red, but she didn't respond. She didn't need to. I could see it in her eyes. Monica, silent as ever, met my gaze with a look I couldn't quite decipher, something between sympathy and amusement. The realization settled like a stone in my chest. Sophia had moved on, and I was the one left fumbling for the truth. I didn't wait for Sophia to explain, or for Monica to offer some trite apology. I just turned and walked toward the door. I think you said everything you needed to say, I muttered, feeling the tightness in my throat. Sophia didn't try to stop me. She didn't call after me. I left them both there, and as I stepped into the hallway, I finally understood. I wasn't part of their world anymore. And for the first time, that didn't hurt. It was freeing. I didn't hear from Sophia for a few days after the visit. It wasn't surprising she had Monica to lean on now, and I was no longer a part of her world. The silence between us felt like a relief at first, a temporary calm after the storm of everything we'd put each other through. But it didn't last. It was late one evening when I got a text from her. She hadn't contacted me in a while, so I was surprised when my phone buzzed with her name. James, we need to talk. Please. The simplicity of the message hit me harder than I expected. There was no drama, no pretense, just a simple request. I knew what it was. I knew what this conversation would be. I stared at the screen for a long moment, debating whether to ignore it or respond. I wasn't ready to face her again, not after everything. But the truth was, I knew we couldn't just leave things hanging in the air. We couldn't just go on pretending that this was something that could be swept under the rug. I didn't reply right away. Instead, I spent the next few hours pacing around the apartment, weighing my options, running through every argument I had in my head. But the words I needed to say never came. At around midnight, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a voicemail. "James, please, I need to know. Did you ever really love me?" I dropped the phone onto the couch, my heart thumping in my chest. That question, that simple, cutting question, it was everything. I'd known for a long time that we were done. I had known it when I packed up my things and left the house, when I saw her with someone else. But hearing her voice, so small and vulnerable, asking for the truth, made everything feel more final. I listened to the voicemail over and over again, hearing her words echo in the empty apartment. It wasn't just about the divorce. It wasn't about her moving on with someone else. It was about everything we had lost and everything I had already left behind. But the thing that stuck with me the most was the tone of her voice. It was so quiet, so unsure. For the first time, I felt like Sophia wasn't the one in control. She was the one asking questions. She was the one who needed answers. I didn't feel angry or resentful. I just felt exhausted, like I'd given everything I had and still wasn't enough. And now, after all this time, she was asking me if I had ever loved her. I thought about it for a long time before I finally texted her back. "I did love you, Sophia. But I stopped when you stopped caring." It wasn't harsh. It wasn't cold. It was just the truth. And somehow, I knew that was the hardest thing to hear for both of us. I stared at my phone screen, waiting for her response. I wasn't sure what I expected, but nothing came through. And that was when I realized the hardest truth of all. I had stopped fighting for her a long time ago. I had stopped fighting for us. And no amount of apologies or explanations could change that. The silence between us was the final answer. I could feel the weight of it settle in my chest, but I didn't feel the pain I expected. I just felt the finality of it all. Sophia had already moved on in ways I hadn't understood until now. And in that moment, I finally understood something about myself. I had already moved on too. I had let go of the anger, the regret, and now the love I had for her. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel hollow anymore. I didn't feel lost. I felt free. The next morning, I woke up to another message from her. "I'm sorry, James. I should have tried harder." But I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. Nothing to fix. We were both done. The rain started around noon, falling in a steady, relentless drizzle that blurred the skyline outside my window. I sat at the edge of the couch, staring out at the city, feeling that same hollow emptiness that had been my constant companion for weeks. It wasn't just the end of my marriage, it was the end of everything I had built with Sophia. The life I'd spent years constructing, the moments I thought mattered, all seemed so distant now, like an echo of something that had never truly existed. Sophia's last message, the one I had ignored, sat unanswered on my phone. I had nothing left to say. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't sad. I was simply done. The apartment had become my refuge, a place I'd carefully shaped to reflect who I was now, who I was becoming. But the silence, as peaceful as it was, also felt like a prison. It was the space I had to confront everything I'd been running from. I thought leaving Sophia behind would be the hardest thing I'd ever do, but in reality, it wasn't. It was the leaving behind of the person I had been, the life I had shared with her, that was the real struggle. I'd spent so much time thinking that Sophia's departure from my life had been the thing that would break me. But here I was, standing in the apartment I'd carved out, feeling more like myself than I had in years. Then, at 3:17 p.m., the knock on the door came again. Soft at first, then louder, more insistent. The sound echoed through the silence of the apartment like a reminder that nothing really ends in peace. I knew exactly who it was before I even reached the door. I hadn't seen her in person since that last conversation at the cafe. I had expected her to call again, to try to explain herself or ask for another chance. But I hadn't expected her to show up unannounced, standing there drenched from the rain, looking every bit as lost as I felt. Sophia stood on the other side of the door, her face pale, her eyes red from crying. She wasn't wearing makeup, and her hair clung to her face as the rain dripped down the back of her coat. She looked smaller than I remembered, more fragile, as if she was finally letting go of the persona she'd tried to maintain for so long. I didn't speak at first. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to let her in, to talk through everything that had been left unsaid between us. But I couldn't. Not anymore. I had already said all I needed to say. I didn't think you'd be here, I said, my voice low, unsure. It wasn't a question. It was just the truth. She looked at me for a long moment, as if trying to figure out whether I was the same person she had once known. She opened her mouth to speak but stopped, swallowing her words. I could see the hesitation in her eyes, the vulnerability she usually kept hidden behind her walls. I don't know what I was expecting, she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. But I thought we could at least be civil. We could talk one last time, you know. I could feel the weight of her words hanging in the air. She was reaching for something that had already slipped away between us. It wasn't just the end of our marriage, it was the end of whatever connection we had left. You didn't need to come here, I said softly, but firmly. I wasn't trying to hurt her, but the truth was clearer than ever. I'm not the person you think I am anymore, Sophia. And you're not the person I thought you were. It's over. She winced, the words hitting harder than she had anticipated. She didn't say anything for a long moment, her eyes shifting to the floor as if searching for something to hold on to. The silence between us deepened, stretching, expanding, until it felt like there was nothing left to say. I didn't want it to be this way, she murmured, her voice breaking. I didn't mean for us to end up here. I didn't answer right away. I just looked at her, watching her stand there in the rain, the weight of everything we had lost hanging heavy between us. I could feel her pulling at me, trying to latch onto something that wasn't there anymore. I know, I finally said, but it is this way. And it's time to let go. The words felt final, almost like a release. I wasn't angry. I wasn't sad. I was just done. And as much as I hated the way things had ended, I knew it was the only way forward. The silence between us had become too loud to ignore. Sophia looked up at me, her eyes searching mine one last time, trying to find something to hold on to. But there was nothing. We were both standing at the edge of something of our past, of who we had been, and there was nothing left to bridge the gap. Goodbye, Sophia, I said quietly, my voice steady despite the weight of it all. For a brief moment, I thought she might say something else, might beg me to stay, might try to change my mind. But she didn't. She just nodded, her face clouded with regret, before turning away. I watched her disappear into the rain, her figure fading into the distance. I didn't follow her. I didn't call after her. There was nothing left for either of us to return to. The door clicked shut behind me, and the apartment was still again. For the first time, the silence didn't feel suffocating. It felt like freedom. I took a deep breath, letting it fill my lungs. This was the moment I had been waiting for. The moment I had been afraid to face. And now that it was here, I felt at peace. The next few days passed in the same quiet rhythm. I didn't check my phone for messages. I didn't search for her name on social media. I didn't need to. The weight of her absence had already settled in, and it was enough. I was finally free, and I would never look back.